Writer's Thought of the Day. What is it about tension that escalates a story so much that can make an audience suddenly care so much more about the story and the characters, and actually have a fear, an actual genuine concern about the unpredictability of the story, about what's going to happen, about the outcome? What is it that makes stakes so powerful? It sounds pretty simple, but stakes and tension just seem to be able to elevate a story to new heights. It's a really unique ability that I think the best writers and stories know how to properly utilize. And although this might not be the best example for it, this is an example that I feel works great for it. Michael Bay's latest film, Ambulance, released about 2 years ago, and let me just say, I kinda loved it. It's a big, bombastic action flick, and ultimately just a fun ride. But what I think makes it the most impactful and memorable of a watch is the fact that it's able to elevate its story, its conflict, and its obstacles to new heights that you couldn't even guess in the beginning of this film. And what's great about this tension introduced into the story is that it provides lots of opportunities for conflict to come through, which it does in a lot of our characters, even with our main two characters. It allows our characters to make unprecedented and outright insane decisions that they probably wouldn't make otherwise. It pushes them to the limits, and that's always fun to watch. You see, Ambulance does something unique that I haven't seen in a lot of other films before. Usually within your film you will have the rising action, and it'll eventually settle to a certain point where we get our character growth, where we progress through the plot, and all of that stuff, which is nice and good. But along with that, the thing is that this movie never really stops progressing. That tension really never ceases. It just keeps exponentially growing. Instead of ever really coming to a complete standstill of the action, the tension, the stakes, and the rising conflict, it actually begins to ramp up more and more as the story goes on. It gets more conflictive, there become more obstacles and variables, more hoops we have to jump through, and just more things we have to do to keep up our survival. And that simple act of ramping up the action upon each other does so much for the story. For one, it doesn't make all these different instances and scenes and events throughout the film feel scattered and unrelated. Actually, on the contrary, it actually brings everything together. It shows cause and effect. It shows how each of these little decisions and actions that happen throughout the story ultimately comes back to bite them. It has an impact on them, and they have to live with that decision in some shape or form. It's really all just one big, long chain instead of a bunch of scattered individual moments, and that's what really binds this movie together and makes it feel like a whole, and thus makes it feel like it has incredibly high stakes. So if we look at the actual story of Ambulance, we start off with our protagonist, Will, and we're seeing that he and his family are struggling. They're not getting the military benefits that he should be getting. And thus this will eventually lead to his partaking in the heist out of his desperation, which is understandable, which then leads into kind of our first obstacle, but also kind of our first temptation to actually take action, which comes in the form of his distant brother Danny, who's been doing some shady stuff, don't you know? And this is the point where Will has to make his first crucial decision of the film, one that you can never walk back from. Although you could argue that the ending kind of does try to do this, but that's kind of its own discussion anyway. And even from this little first decision, we've already kind of set the stage for the stakes of the story. I mean, it's a bank robbery, it's a full blown out heist, like, it's not a safe thing to do. You can get caught. Who knows what'll happen? It's pretty risky in and of itself. But the story's just getting started, and this is where everything starts to go wrong. Very, very wrong. They ultimately blow the heist, and they blow their cover in the process, and lose just about everybody in the team. So now they've been whittled down, they've been discovered, and now they're on the run, which is pretty bad. But to make it worse, now they stop an ambulance as a ride out of there, but end up shooting a cop. And this is the point where we're getting into unfamiliar territory that we shouldn't even get into, that we weren't even planning to get into the first place. Now we're on the run with two hostages, one paramedic and one a bleeding cop that we shot, which we will most definitely be responsible for later on. And that is a huge obstacle and risk against us. And now the tension is rising, and we've just started. And just take note of how the story continues that trend of building upon that tension and ramping it up and up more and more throughout the story. Now with hostages and on the run, we're engaging on a full-on chase with patrol cars and choppers right on our tail. We're taking risky and nasty detours to try to get out of there. Then pretty soon we have to start operating on that cop lying in the back of a moving ambulance, which is not even accounting for, bursting internal organs. That might be a problem. And just when we thought this couldn't get any worse, we suddenly need some reinforcements with some shady people, which will definitely have some bad consequences later on. But right now we can't think about that because we're out of options, and thus, yeah, Bayhem. Which then we gotta hide the cop and the paramedic from these shady people, and well, we gotta burn some bridges because we gotta get out of there, and now everybody is after us. And that is basically, in a nutshell, the progression of this film. And that's really what I love about this kind of movie, is that use of tension and this just ramping of action and suspense. That's what keeps us on our toes. That's what keeps the story moving and growing and building upon itself. It never really comes to a standstill. Although you could argue there are a few standstill moments where nothing really dangerous is happening, even though we're still on the run. And that does allow for some character progression, which does come into account later into the film. And I do applaud it for that as well. And I think this goes to show the art of using tension and stakes to your advantage. They often say that what makes a truly scary movie is the fear of the unknown, but for movies like this, I'd say it's the fear of uncertainty. You don't know what's going to go wrong, you don't know what's going to happen, you don't know who's going to live or die, you don't know who's going to make it out or not, if we're going to make it out or not. You don't know how this little collage of characters are going to work together in this kind of setting, who's going to attach to who's going to betray who. I mean, the possibilities are endless, and there's so much potential for conflict, for friendship, for character growth, all sorts of different story beats and themes and character arcs, and I mean, the possibilities are endless. And I will say, I think this is Michael Bay at his peak. This is what he does best. Obviously, his films don't have a great reputation for themselves, deservedly so most of the time. But even then, there are little instances within the films, each of these little scenes, that you can really see a lot of work gone into it. Scenes that actually have a bit of tension, that you're concerned about the characters. Oh no, what's gonna happen? Are they gonna make it out alive? And who's that guy? Oh, he's dead, okay. To which I also want to say, I think there's always something to be learned from films like this. Sure, you might think of this as just kind of a big blockbuster summer action movie, which it definitely is, and unapologetically so. But even then, I do believe there's something to be learned from this. I do think that I have learned something from this experience, and it's something pretty valuable that I hope to expand on. And so those are just my thoughts on this film. Let me know what you guys think about it, and I'll catch you in the next one.